So there were three things that I wanted to go through today. One, which we all run into all the time as we talk to people and organize, is why worshiping money doesn't work. The second point is why Glass-Steagall has to be reinstated, the Banking Act, and why Dodd-Frank is a total disaster. And people who've been organizing have heard about Dodd-Frank. The latest line is like the line we got on Obama, which is, why don't you give it more time? So you have a criminal policy, a policy that's designed to destroy the United States, and people are saying, let's go with it longer. Let's see if it's really that let's see how much we can be destroyed. And then the third point is the question of Obama's impeachment, because we really have a very slim chance of survival if he is not removed from office. Yes, as you just mentioned, the bridge in Washington State. Everyone heard about this. This is the I-5. It's a major highway into Seattle. It's the only main route. Dana knows better than I do because he came from out there, from Seattle all the way up to Canada, and all of a sudden it just collapses. There were, I think, 3 cars on it. As far as I know, no one died. It was a shallow area, but people were injured and had to be taken to the hospital. And they said it was not structurally deficient. It was only supposedly functionally deficient. Now, we just had a report, which I showed at the meeting that we had, that you were at, on the New Jersey bridges. And it turns out 35% of New Jersey bridges have the same rating, where they say they are, quote unquote, functionally deficient, which they say has nothing to do with the structure. They're perfectly fine. It's just that they're not in the right location, or you can't have enough highway lanes, or somehow the change in traffic patterns has made them obsolete, but otherwise they're perfectly safe. So now we know that 35% of the bridges in New Jersey have the same rating as this thing that just collapsed in Seattle. On drinking water, in Camden County, which is the most extreme case, because the state overall, because the pipes are so old and decrepit that there's massive leakage. So in the state as a whole, 26% of drinking water is lost from the point of where it's treated to when it comes at your faucet. So we're having massive loss of fresh water just into the ground because of the pipes. In Camden County, they're losing 45% of the clean water. I mean, talk about waste, and you think about what your water bills are. And then you also think of the implications, because I know when my husband and I lived in Washington, D.C., maybe 17 or 18 years ago, we got a letter in the mail from the Department of Health and Sanitation of the capital. This is the capital of the United States. And the letter said, if you are HIV positive or have other immune deficiencies, don't drink your tap water, because the pipes are 100 years old and it's impossible to get all of the bacteria and other contaminants out of the water. So here you are in the capital of the United States being told that the plumbing system is so old that if you have health problems, you should not drink tap water. I mean, it really it's hideous. Now, the other thing which I had heard after Sandy, but is a big deal, New Jersey pumps 23 billion gallons per year of raw sewage into the Hudson, Hackensack, and Passaic rivers. And the way that works is if it's very dry and there's no rain, then the system can handle it. But as soon as you get, I think they said only 0.2 of an inch of rain, then it's overflow and you have the raw sewage flowing over and just going straight into our waterways. In terms of dams, they have 4 classifications of dams in terms of the danger they would pose if they broke. And there's something called high hazard dams. These are dams where if the dam were to be breached or break, that you would expect a loss, not only loss of property, but a great loss of life. That is a dam that's near a city or near a residential area. We have a lot of people living. So New Jersey has 67 of its high hazard dams which are rated to not be in shape. So you have 67 dams that are decrepit, that need repair, that could lead to massive loss of life or property damage. So there's a report that was put out called Facing Our Futures, which I and a colleague have been reviewing, and what they say is that if you were to address these areas, and they look at fresh water, wastewater, the energy grid, dams and roads and rail, and they also look at education, but if you were to look at these areas of hard infrastructure, the state would need about $126 billion over 10 years. Now, you can say that that sounds like a lot of money, $126 billion over 10 years, but you realize right now Ben Bernanke is issuing $85 billion every month to buy back mortgage-backed securities, to buy back garbage from the European banking system. So in 1.5 months, Bernanke is issuing what it would cost in 10 years to rebuild all of the infrastructure in New Jersey. And I started playing around with this. I wanted to see if we'd kept up Bernanke's rate of printing money over 10 years, how much money that would be. And it came to 11,600 billion, or $11.6 trillion. So that's about 100 times what New Jersey needs. So even if you said New Jersey was average, and I bet we're not, I bet the cost of our infrastructure is a little bit more than average, because a lot of it's old. The eastern coast cities tend to, I think, to be older, and we are very densely populated. But even suppose that every single state in the union needed as much as New Jersey needs, you realize we could do the entire United States twice in 10 years for what Bernanke is spending on this bailout, right? And it really puts to lie the idea when people say we don't have the money, it really has nothing to do with money. That's what you see. We're shelling out $85 billion a month. So how dare they say it has to do with money? It's clear that the policy is actually genocide against the population. It has nothing to do with money. That's why I'm saying this idea of worship of money, and everyone here, you know, oh, they spent so much money, you know, oh, why are they're wasting money. The money really has no value per se, and the problem is, and the evil of it is when you start trying to put monetary values against values of human life, or things that are really valuable in the universe. So you can ask here, how many of you would say, well, I would consider, if my child had an emergency, I would consider spending $500. But if we're going to cost $2 million, forget it. They should just die. No one here would say that, I would hope. I certainly wouldn't say that. A human life is not a dollar amount. What a human being contributes to the universe cannot be expressed in something as low level an accounting gimmick as money, but that's the way it's looked at. Now there's a very interesting scientist who LaRouche references a lot called Wolfgang Köhler, who was in a dialogue with Albert Einstein and Planck, and he was really studying, well, he's famous for his work on Gestalt psychology, but the question is, what's the relationship between mind and brain? In other words, there's physical processes, but there's obviously also things that don't seem to be in the physical domain. So how do you figure out how people think, how they're creative? So Köhler, as kind of a test, said, and this was in the 1950s, he said, if you break down a human being into all of their chemical components, like how much oxygen, how much water, how much salt, aluminum, you know, whatever, all these little trace elements that go into the human body, he came up with a figure, I think it was $64.85. So you could say by the monetarist terms that a human being is worth $64.85, or with inflation today, maybe we're worth $112 or something. I don't know. And you would say that's kind of a crazy way to look at it. In fact, most people have spent more than $112 going to the dentist. So obviously, if you're sane, you don't think about it that way. But I wanted to read to you Bill Gates, Mr. Microsoft, who thinks that the world has too many people. he gave an interview to Ezra Klein in the Washington Post, and Klein asked him, how do you make these decisions about what is worth paying for? They're talking about donations that the Gates Foundation is giving to Africa and other places. And so Gates says, well, the way they talked about it is, what's a year of life worth? They call it a disability adjusted life year, or DALY, daily. Disability adjusted life year. So they've created a dollar value for life. When you're running a poor country healthcare system, you can't treat a year of life as being worth more than, say, $200 or $300. Otherwise, you'll bankrupt the health system immediately. So with few exceptions, you do nothing for things like cancer. And he said even simple things don't pass the test. We're on the verge of saying that Africa should do some blood pressure medicine because it's become generic and so cheap. It's such a common issue in terms of heart attack death. But here's the good news for these countries. If you spend the less than 2% of what rich countries spend, but you spend it on vaccinations and antibiotics, you get over half of all that healthcare does to extend life. So why don't we give those poor people 2%, less than 2% of what we spend, and then half of them could live a little bit longer. Because we got to calculate it in terms of dollars, right? We have to do it by dollars. And then he says, unfortunately, in rich world health, innovation is your friend and enemy. Innovation is inventing organ replacement, joint replacement. We're inventing ways of doing new things that cost $300,000 and take people in their 70s on average and give them an extra, say, 2 or 3 years of life. And then you have to say, given finite resources, should we fire 2 or 3 school teachers to give 2 or 3 extra years of life to someone in their 70s? And with chemotherapies, we've got things where we'll spend our dollars on treatments, which you're valuing a life here at over $10 to $20 million. Can you imagine thinking your life is worth $10 to $20 million? Which, if you were infinitely rich, of course that would be fine. So most innovations, unfortunately, increase the net costs of the healthcare system. There's a few, particularly having to do with chronic diseases, that are an exception. If you could cure Alzheimer's, if you could avoid diabetes, those are gigantic in terms of saving money, but the incentive regime doesn't favor them. Okay, so think about, and this is, by the way, the underlying premise of the Obama healthcare plan. It's putting a human person equal to a certain dollar value. And then they call it quality adjusted life years, QALY, which means what Ezekiel Emanuel, Rahm Emanuel's brother who helped write the bill, says that only between the age of 15 and 45 do people really have a very good life anyway. So you only want to spend the maximum amount of money on people between those age brackets. If you're under 15 or if you're over 45, then we're really going to have to start limiting your health care, because it's just not worth it, because your quality of life is just not as great. So if you can't run 10 miles, well, probably you're not feeling that comfortable and your life just is not worth the investment. So forget about it. And that's the way they do these measurements. Hold on, just go ahead.
Sorry.
Well, it's hideously ugly. And see, the irony is when do they decide a financial institution doesn't have a good quality of life? I mean, why didn't we decide that AIG did not have a good quality of life? If they need to be on life support, aren't you supposed to euthanize them? But there's no limit to what we're willing to spend on bankrupt financial institutions.
Yeah.
I mean, it is really something. So we've shelled out $29 trillion in the form of bailouts. But they're going to turn around and tell you that they're going to put a dollar value on a human life. And see, this is the Dodd-Frank Act, because what the Dodd-Frank Act codifies in law, Barney Frank and Chris Dodd, is that, and I'll just read, this is a segment of the Dodd-Frank Act from Title II, where they say, unlike other insolvency regimes, however, the FDIC may deviate from this principle as necessary to maximize the value of the assets of the covered financial company. In other words, the whole purpose of it is you want to maximize the value of the assets of what your so-called bank, your financial institution, is holding. It's not for the people who have deposits. It's to maximize the value of the institution. To initiate and continue operations essential to implementation of the receivership or any bridge financial company, to maximize the present value return from the sale or other disposition of the assets of the company, or to minimize the amount of any loss realized upon the sale or other disposition of the assets of the company. So in other words, if you have a financial institution that's doing something crazy, like student loan debt, they're gambling on student loan debt. How many students now are graduating with $60,000 or $70,000 or $80,000 worth of debt and they can't get a job? So is that a really good investment? You want to have student loan debt be the basis for your pension fund or mortgages? But what Dodd-Frank is saying is because the bank invested in that, no matter how crazy it is, we have to protect that asset. That's called an asset. Student loan debt is now called an asset. Just like people's credit card debt is one asset, and the 19% interest that you pay on your credit card debt is considered another asset. And they can be split off and sold to separate people. And what Obama under Dodd-Frank is proposing, that we kill people in order to protect this fictitious garbage. That's literally what they're saying. So going on in the Dodd-Frank bill, in disposing of assets, the FDIC must use the best efforts to maximize returns, minimize losses, and mitigate the potential for serious adverse effects to the financial system. In deciding upon a course of action, the FDIC also must determine that such action is necessary for the financial stability of the United States, and it must ensure that unsecured and uninsured creditors bear losses in accordance with the priority of claim provisions. What is a creditor? What is a creditor in a bank? Does anyone have any idea? Creditor, isn't that normally someone that you owe money to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, well, you know what the creditors are? The depositors. Because when you deposit money in the bank is holding the money, and at some point they can be called upon to give it back to you. So under Dodd-Frank, you are now a creditor. You are a creditor trying to get money, which you may have thought it was your money, but it's not your money. It's the bank's money. Okay, as soon as you put it in the bank, it's now the bank's money. So you may have thought that it was your money, but the bank counts you as like a debt collector trying to take money out of the bank, which was your deposit. And that is in the Dodd-Frank Act. So when you see the idea of people saying, oh, let's give it a little more time, what are you giving more time? If some guy is a bank robber and he's got an AK-47 and a hood and a getaway car, and he's going to the nearest bank, and you say, let's give him some more time. I mean, that's essentially what they're saying with this Dodd-Frank Act. There is nothing good in the act. The intent is to steal the savings of the American people and increase the death rate. So the idea, because you run into this on Capitol Hill, I ran into it with Congressman Scott Garrett. I had a run-in with him at a Tea Party meeting in Sussex County, and I said, I don't want to hear all of the sophistical lies that I got from your finance person when I was in Washington. Will you sign on to Glass-Steagall? Yes or no? And he goes, what did my guy say? And I said, he said Glass-Steagall wouldn't have prevented the collapse. But who cares? These things should have collapsed. We didn't want to prevent the collapse. I don't care if Lehman Brothers went under. Nobody died from that, So, but anyway, and then he said, no, Dodd-Frank. But you realize what he's advocating, which is this incredible ripoff, and the idea that we are supposed to save some kind of fictitious value of an institution engaged in criminal activity, and that takes priority over human beings, human life, society, the nation, infrastructure, anything else. So what you saw happen in Cyprus, where, remember, everyone had all their deposits over 100,000 euro frozen, and then they were allowed to withdraw a maximum of 300 euro per day, which you can say is a lot. That'd be like, over 400 bucks per day. Well, if you're a private person, maybe that's okay until you have to pay your rent or your mortgage. But a lot of these accounts were small business accounts. So you can't operate with that. You have to buy food in bulk. You have to buy your purchases in bulk. Everything just got frozen. And that's fine. What if you froze everything coming into New York City? What if there could be no food delivered to a single grocery store in New York City? What would that look like? And that's what you're playing with right now. That's what Dodd-Frank is. So Mr. LaRouche was extremely sharp last night and then again in discussion today that it's not Glass-Steagall or something else. Either we get Glass-Steagall or we are just going to disappear, because the so-called other option is not an option. Dodd-Frank is not a regulatory measure. It's a rip-off bill, and it puts in law exactly what they did to Cyprus and what they intend to do to the American people. And I just read you the text of the bill, from the bill, that says that that's what they intend to do. And of course, the bill is something like 700 and something pages, and when you have all the instructions, it's 30,000 pages. So they're counting on most people never finding out what's in it, just like with Obama's health care bill. But that's the case. Now, Glass-Steagall is the exact opposite. What Glass-Steagall did, and FDR signed Glass-Steagall into law on June 16th, 1933, and it was part of a banking package which also included the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, because what Glass-Steagall does is it separates the banks by function. And this is very important because you have this whole movement about too big to fail or break up the banks. The size doesn't have to do with it. What the question is what is the bank doing? Maybe you have a very large bank that just does savings and loans and mortgages. That's fine. That's transparent activity. But if you have a small bank that's selling insurance and that's selling mortgage-backed securities and other kinds of speculative instruments, what has been going on now, and Bank of America did this in one case, I forget which entity it had swallowed, Lehman Brothers or something or other, and they're now using the deposits from the depositors, the savings accounts of the depositors, as collateral to back up the crap from their investment wing. And see, that was the whole point of Glass-Steagall, because under Glass-Steagall, this was totally illegal. You couldn't even have the same people on the board. You had two different banks, and if you wanted to invest in the market, fine. And you know how that works. You get a higher interest rate because you know you're taking a risk. And maybe you win and maybe you lose. And if you lose, you lose. You don't expect that you get a bailout for what you invested. But that firewall was taken down, and so now you have this incredible mess where the depositors are called creditors, and we are going to be called on to bail out criminal financial investments that went bad, which have nothing to do with the well-being of the country. So what's happened, as everyone here I think knows, is we managed to get the bill reintroduced in the House of Representatives early, like January, and it was H.R. 129. Then we've had since January a huge fight to get it in the Senate, because if you can keep a bill out of the Senate, you don't have to worry that it's going to be adopted into law. And the Senate is a lot easier to control. It's only 100 people, and they are in for 6 years, and the Senate is very, very highly controlled as it is anyway. So Harry Reid, in collaboration with Obama, had put the kibosh had put the kibosh on the Senate doing anything, and they were hoping, they basically figured they had it locked up. And then Tom Harkin last week introduced Glass-Steagall in the Senate. And I would say that indicates two things. One is the weakness of Obama. He is in a lot of trouble over Benghazi, the IRS case, the AP case, and you don't know what's going to come out next. One person was saying, well, how's Obama doing? And someone say, what's broken in the last hour? because it's just coming down so fast. He's losing his grip. Come on, and there's seats up here. The other factor on why this, I think, passed in the Senate is because what Obama did with the sequestration, because it's now dawning on people that it's really life and death, and people probably heard these cases like this cancer treatment facility on Long Island where they had 16,000 patients and 5,000 are being now just dumped because they're not going to treat them anymore because the budget was cut. And you have all over the country, you have massive cuts to Medicare. Obama's health care plan includes $750 billion in cuts to Medicare. Over so much for how he wants everyone to have health care. And a lot of doctors are now refusing to take Medicare patients.
Yes, bad time. Hold me back later.
So, I mean, it's, and you see this all over the country, like in New Jersey, I forget how many tens of thousands of jobs are affected by the sequestration. So all of a sudden, it's abrupt, it's very clear that the policy is going to kill people. And all of these congressmen and senators, I mean, I don't have time to sit in their offices and see what phone calls are coming in, but you can imagine that they're getting phone calls from their whole district from people who just tried to go to the doctor and couldn't go, or if you go to the doctor, you suddenly find that your insurance company no longer covers a whole bunch of medications. I know at my doctor's office, the administrators there are going bonkers because they say the pharmacies now are turning back all kinds of medications that the health insurance companies used to cover, and now they no longer cover them. So it's a genocide policy. So this also is pressure coming on the Congress. So you have these factors of Obama's downfall and the fact that reality is killing people, and Americans tend to be rather feisty. Americans don't like it when people try to kill them. So they tend to fight back, and we're seeing a lot more of that. So it's interesting because if you think about what would occur then if we were to get Glass-Steagall passed, if you were to separate the banks, and then you were to say, we are not bailing out this speculative crap, we're going to let it go. All of a sudden, what you would see, and this is why you immediately have to go to a credit system of Hamilton, because all kinds of garbage is in this crazy speculative nonsense. One of the things they did to municipalities was this is, what's his name, the congressman in Massachusetts who was investigating Standard & Poor's and Moody's, and they were downgrading municipal debt. So they were downgrading, so some cities were finding it hard to actually float a bond, so they were forced into these other crazy things like debt swaps, interest rate swaps, all kinds of crazy speculative stuff. They've lost a lot of money, and also these things are not worth much, but you don't know until you try to sell it or cash it in. So what you will find when Glass-Steagall passes is actually everyone is bankrupt. You'll find that there are pension funds that are unfunded. You'll find that there are cities and towns and municipalities that actually have no money. I mean, that's really the case anyway, but it would become very clear. And so then the question is, all right, now that we've cleared out this garbage that is not real, what do you do to actually ensure that you keep society together, that people have a reasonable standard of living, that people have access to health care, that they have jobs, electricity, running water, you know, the basic necessities? And this is where the question of Alexander Hamilton and the National Bank comes in. Because what Hamilton did is, after the American Revolution, we had, I don't know, between $50 and $60 million worth of debt, which in 1789 was a huge amount of money. And in fact, this guy from MIT who wrote a delightful op-ed in the New York Times called Mr. Hamilton's Growth Strategy, he said that when Hamilton came in as Treasury Secretary, the debt to income ratio in the U.S. was 46-1. And he claimed that today it's something like 6-1. So if you took that as a standard, we were in a lot worse shape right after the American Revolution than we are right now. And Alexander Hamilton and George Washington did not come in with a policy saying we're going to cancel all scientific progress and we're going to kill off the elderly because they cost too much money. They did not say we're going to cut the budget, we're not going to build canals, we're going to have to save money. No, what Hamilton did is he actually went into debt another $10 million. So here they already had 60 million, and he said, you know what, we're going to issue another 10 million in the form of credit. But for what? Because he knew that if you were going to pay back the European countries who helped us get through the revolution and families who gave their life savings and whoever helped fund this, that it was unacceptable. Hamilton said you can't just not pay it. You can't just say hey you guys, look, we just had a revolution, we were torn to shreds, we don't have any industry, so just forgive it. He said a new nation cannot start out on that kind of footing. We have to make good on this. And the way we're going to make good on this is we're going to increase the productivity of the nation. And the only way to increase the productivity of the nation was to invest in roads, in canals, in farmland, in things that would actually make it possible for people to be more productive. And that's how the United States very rapidly became the nation with the highest standard of living and was the most productive nation. In fact, at certain points in our history, we have produced more than the entire rest of the world combined. And it was because of this policy. But what do you hear today? You hear, again, this insanity about money. Oh, no, we have to cut. No, the only way you do it, you got to cut the budget. Shut down the nursing home. Get rid of the police. No, we can't fix the bridge. We can't fix the water main. So what happens is you shrink the tax base. So now you have a situation where the last 3 people with a job are supposed to pay enough in taxes to cover everyone else who's not working. It's an impossible situation. But what the problem is that they don't understand the credit system. They're all looking at it from the standpoint of what this stupid line people, oh, you run a government like your family budget. Well, your family doesn't have the ability to issue $10 million in credit, but the nation does. So what you would have to do immediately after Glass-Steagall is you'd have to get a report. You'd want to work with governors all over the country and say, okay, what are the top crisis points in your state? We're going to do an actual bailout, not a bailout of criminal speculative garbage. We're going to find out, okay, New Jersey needs $126 billion in infrastructure. This state needs this. You have, a $60 billion shortfall in your pension funds. 29 schools are collapsing, whatever it is. Every state should put together a report on what is actually needed. And the federal government can issue that in the form of credit, because what would happen in New Jersey if we spent $126 billion building all this stuff? How many people would be employed that are not employed right now? Would they buy groceries? Would they pay taxes? Would they go to a hotel? Would they, buy clothing? Would they buy a house? And what you see is that you get a massive return when you invest in things that increase the productivity. That's what Alexander Hamilton understood. So it would be ultimately no loss to the government to come up with whatever the figure is needed to build the nation. And one of the things that LaRouche has been referencing now repeatedly is this question of NWAPA. I don't know how many people are familiar with that, the North American Water and Power Alliance. But it's a huge project. It was designed in the 60s. And you think about Oklahoma right now with this tornado, but also what's been happening with the drought and so on. What NWAPA would do is take water all the way from Alaska and bring it down through Canada. You'd fill up the Rocky Mountain Trench in Canada, and then this water could be brought. You take about 11% of the runoff, because what you have in Alaska is you have a lot of water from evaporation, which comes up and hits the mountains and just washes down in the form of rain. You have something like 50% of all the rainfall in the hemisphere up there, and it's just wasted fresh water. So you divert 11% of that massive amount of water and bring it down into Canada and the continental United States. And you could solve all these problems in California, where you can't get water in the city because you have to have it for the farms, or, people arguing that we have to save a minnow so we can't irrigate, so San Francisco gets no water, or what, crazy arguments over water. You have Lake Mead and the Colorado River. These areas are drying out. The rivers are becoming mineralized. You have in the Midwest the Ogallala Aquifer, which is underground water, which has now been severely depleted so that the land is even sinking. And you have crazy people proposing that in Kansas we should take down the trees because they're taking too much water. Now FDR planted the trees to stop the Dust Bowl, and now they're saying we're going to get rid of the trees because we don't have any water for the trees. You have real insanity. So NWAPA, this giant project, would take about 25 to 30 years to build. It would employ 7 million people proper just in building the tunnels and lifts and those projects. But then you think of if we needed a couple nuclear plants to pump the water up into the Sawtooth Mountains, the towns you would build, like Las Vegas, didn't exist before, not that it's so great now, but the idea is in order to have a workforce in some of these remote areas, we're going to bring the water, you're going to have to build new cities. So you're talking about a multiplier. Maybe it would make 14 million or 20 million new high-paying jobs, and you're talking about careers because it's a project that takes 30 years to build. Now, is that worth investing in? And how many of these could we have built for the $29 trillion that we've spent on the bailout thus far? And I think it's really important to think of it this way, because what you see, all these arguments that are couched in terms of money, we don't have money for this, we don't have money for that, it's too much money, you're wasting money. It has nothing to do with money at all. It has to do with the intent of the government. And we happen to have a president who wants us dead. He is a puppet of the Queen and Tony Blair, and Prince Philip has stated extremely explicitly, as the Queen has in her own royal way, that the world really should only have 1 billion people on it. So if you're starting from the standpoint that we have 6 billion excess people, okay, in this room, how many of us are in here? Okay, 10, 16, 18. All right, so 3 people in this room would be allowed to live. By their standards, 3 people would be allowed to live, everyone else drop dead, okay? That's the policy. It has nothing to do with money. So the whole point about Glass-Steagall is that it's the first step in getting to a credit system, which is what is required to actually have an economy which reflects what it means to be a human being. We are not animals. We are not going to do the same thing. If you have a pet or you've observed wild animals, you may notice that they do the same thing from generation to generation. Like, you don't suddenly get beavers. Beavers, I used to like to watch beavers because they're really cute and they build their own houses and it's really interesting, and their houses have little beds inside, and so I used to spend a lot of time watching beavers. Well, you know what? All the years I watched a beaver, there was never a beaver who came out of the water and learned how to drive a car. They do the same thing, and if the world changes, they are unable to adapt to it. But human beings are different. What you do today, your grandparents probably never dreamed of doing. And simple things that we take for granted, like having refrigeration for our food, or light at night, or heat in our house, even a generation ago in some rural parts of the United States, people didn't have this. So human beings actually don't have to go extinct like almost every other creature does, because we have a capacity. If people say you're made in the image of God or made in the image of the Creator, we have a creative capacity which is unique. And that is where the value lies, and that is something where there's no dollar amount you're going to put on that. So the last thing, just on the question of Obama and the crisis. Oh, and I forgot, actually I should go through this right now. On the Dodd-Frank bill, this is really wild. So I told you what's involved in the bill, which is stealing from everybody in order to save the value of these institutions. There was an expose in the New York Times yesterday, which is really fascinating, and it just goes through segments of the bill and that they were literally just written straight by the bankers, and that's who did it. They talk about the one that Colin Peterson was complaining about, and it was written, this bill was written by a corporate lawyer named William Bopp, who represents the Swaps Dealers Association, and it was co-sponsored by Connecticut Congressman Jim Himes, who's a former Goldman Sachs employee who heads up the House Democratic fundraising. And the bill was the exact language from this guy, Bob. So you have someone from the Swap Dealers Association writing law for the U.S. Congress. There's another bill which they're calling it Free the London $700 trillion bill, which sailed through the Financial Services Committee with bipartisan support. And that one was written by Citigroup. Isn't that nice? Not members of Congress. It was written by Citigroup directly. And then Congressman Joe Crowley, people know, from New York. I think he's Yonkers area. So he worked with Wall Street and Himes to write some of the other bills. And then they turn around and they say things like, quote, on the banks, it's appalling, it's disgusting, it's wasteful, and it opens the possibilities of conflicts of interest and corruption. Unfortunately, it's the world we live in, right? So I'm going to plunge in with both foot and make sure that theft and corruption is law. So it's literally the case that the Dodd-Frank bill, the Dodd-Frank Act, and the bills associated with it are actually written by the bankers that they are supposedly regulating. So do you think they are going to do anything to regulate these bankers? I mean, it's unbelievable. Anyway, so now just the last point on Obama and what's happening with him. So you can see our succeeding in getting Glass-Steagall through is completely intertwined with our ability to remove Obama from the White House. And if you remember, when Obama first got elected and was sworn in and inaugurated, and we tried, LaRouche tries with every president when they come in. You know, we campaigned against Obama. We knew he was rotten. We knew every connection to Soros and everything else. But you want the nation to survive. So we tried to offer various proposals. Of course, none of them were adopted. And then what does Obama do? He goes to London. People remember he and Michelle met the Queen, and you had that incident where the Queen, no, Michelle touched the Queen. She put her arm around the Queen, which you're not supposed to do. And then he went to Saudi Arabia and bowed till his head hit the floor. And what's Britain and Saudi Arabia? That is the empire. That's the two empires that ran the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center. So you have Obama as his first act as being president, goes and pays homage to these empires. And then what is he doing through his administration? Well, he's funding Al-Qaeda. We're backing Al-Qaeda. The whole Syrian, so-called Free Syrian Army is a bunch of people from all different countries. And you did have a legitimate opposition group in Syria, but they didn't want violence. They wanted an election, and they wanted a referendum. And that got taken over by al-Nusra, which is the new Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Iraq was a secular state before. They didn't used to have Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Now, thanks to our invasion and our work in Iraq, they have Al-Qaeda in Iraq. So the Saudis were funding al-Nusra, and they were even telling the people they were funding that they should kill other opposition members if they wouldn't work with Al-Qaeda. So this is what we are backing, and you have completely wacko, insane senators like McCain, who I think is the poster child for why no one should be tortured, because he's clearly now lost his marbles. As Dana said at the meeting, he's saying we should invade Syria. And Menendez, our own lovely Robert Menendez from New Jersey, is joining him in this. And then Menendez introduced a bill, and this is where you see it's just total combat. The Senate last week, or this past week, voted 99-0 to back up Israel if Israel were to launch a strike on Iran. This is so insane. The Israeli Knesset does not vote 99% for war, because you have people in Israel who know what it means Israel is a small country. They are surrounded by nations with 1 billion Muslims. Do they want that war? Do they want to bring that on their heads? But Menendez doesn't care. They would be perfectly happy to use Israel like a suicide bomb to blow up the whole region. So our Senate is so insane that they vote 99-0 in effect to say, why don't you guys go ahead and start the war? And then we can have a thermonuclear war between the US and Russia, because that's what you're dealing with in the region. Syria, for example, is not Libya. And Libya has worked out brilliantly. You can see we've had tremendous success there after killing Gaddafi. That whole country is completely in chaos. There's no security whatsoever, and it's being taken over by Al-Qaeda. So we're supposed to do the same thing to Syria, except Syria has a major Russian naval base. It's a major base for the Russian military. So when we attack Syria, what are we attacking? And that's why the Russians are saying this is a line that you do not cross. And anyone who knows any history knows that the Russians are not going to back down. But the British are perfectly happy to play this kind of a nuclear chicken game with Russia as if you're going to get them to back down. And I think there was a shift. You saw that Senator Kerry had this meeting with Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, and we're beginning to take a little bit of a different tact. And I think what shifted it is the Israelis launched these strikes on Syria. And I think I don't know, this is my own, the Russians probably had a pretty, besides what they said publicly, which was pretty sharp, I would imagine privately they said something pretty clear. And two, that people could see we are like this close from a thermonuclear war. And you don't want to go there. So you have a little bit of a shift, and Obama is being weakened. Obama doesn't have the grip that he had, so there's a little bit of a shift between U.S.-Russia relations. But what it means, it's not clear. Right now, everything is fluid. Nothing is locked in. On the one hand, you have Senator Tom Harkin introducing Glass-Steagall in the Senate because of a massive fight that we've been waging. On the other hand, the senators turn around and vote 99-0 for a thermonuclear war, in effect. So we have quite a battle on our hands. And then the last thing I'll say in closing, I'd like to thank everybody here for petitioning and helping me get on the ballot. We have, we're going to be filing well over 2,000 signatures on Tuesday. And I'm doing a press conference on Tuesday in Trenton at 1 o'clock. And anyone who can join me for that would be excellent. And it just turns out, it's very funny, because I had set this appointment several weeks ago, but it turns out now that the day that I'm filing my petitions and holding the press conference at the Board of Elections is the day that Barack Obama has chosen to come to New Jersey to tour the Jersey shore with Governor Christie. So it just makes it all the more appropriate. And I think also the fact that Obama and Christie are like this all the time.
Are they going to keep the clothes on?
I hope so.
Harry left.
Yeah, Harry's gone, so.
Oh, Harry's gone.
Anyway, yeah.
Kirsty shook hands with Snooki yesterday.
Oh, yes, I
No.
saw that.
Really?
They made up?
Well, Snooki and her friends said they think Christie still doesn't like them that much. I mean, now here, you want to hear funny? Governor Christie thinks that Snooki has given New Jersey a bad image. Now, what kind of image has Governor Christie given New Jersey? That's the pot calling the kettle black, I would say. Anyway, pretty funny. Yeah, so that's what I have. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I think we can see that we have the potential to win the fight for civilization. And that's the first. So that's what I have. And if there's questions or anything else, or people just want to get up and eat crackers and cookies, yeah.
We're talking about Obama and his downfall. With all this going on, all this swimming about him, he seems to be in the same frame of mind, very even, as he was when he came back from China and that first visitation he had across the sea. All different countries he had gone to, some of which he was snubbed very carefully. And all of a sudden he came back and he was a totally different type of person. Now, I don't know what's going on, but I've heard rumors, and I don't know if I need to go into them here, but I'm getting that same message from Obama right now, that he's very even and not, he's not tipping one way or the other, getting excited or anything like that. Could there be a problem with him, such as drugs? I shouldn't say drugs.
I'm sure. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me at all. The other thing he also just did do, which is really weird, is he just went and gave this big speech about why it was legitimate for him to kill 4 U.S. citizens with drones, which he hasn't wanted to address, and I think he's somehow thinking that he can stand up in front of Americans and say that there was a legitimate reason. The National Defense University at Fort McNair, he gets up and says why we had to kill 4 U.S. citizens with no due process, no trial, no charges, with drones, which is very bizarre.
Well, he said, I think they said only one was from accuracy, the others were just collateral damage.
Right. Yeah, one of them was a threat, and his 16-year-old son that we killed the next day at a barbecue, and the others, whatever, you just can't account for that. I mean, but imagine why. I mean, first of all, the idea of trying to legitimize this is bizarre. Secondly, he clearly feels that he now is not looking so good. So he's making this speech. And I have to tell you, I don't know how much he thinks at all. I really think that he is a malignant narcissist. I mean, that's what some people have said. And people like that thrive on crisis. Like if they're losing an election or the country's going crazy, they actually get more confident because it's just part of what they need to exist. So, you do have that.
That's another thought now.
Yeah, like remember after the 2010 elections and the Democrats all got trounced because people are so disgusted with Obama, and then Obama's line basically was that the American people were too stupid to appreciate the good job that he's done. I mean, he says this stuff, he says this and he believes it on some level. That's what's really freaky about the whole thing. Which is why the other option, of course, is if anyone had any guts or, someone up there got the idea that we actually all could be dead, aside from just impeachment, is the 25th Amendment.
Right.
Section 4, right, that the president is a mental case. He can't handle the job and has to be removed.
Mm-hmm. I had heard that was in the works, and I just have heard nothing more.
Yeah, there's been talk, off and on. But I think that, in a sense, the litmus test is where do we stand on Glass-Steagall, and where we stand on Glass-Steagall sort of indicates how's Obama doing. If Glass-Steagall's up, Obama's down. Glass-Steagall's down, then Obama's up.
I got a question. Now, if he stays as the president until 2014, I think that's when his Obamacare gonna kick in, right? I mean,
Well, it's starting now. It kicks in 2014.
right.
He stays until 2016. I mean,
Right.
till January of 2017.
I'm sure people are thinking about this, what I'm about to say. Who's gonna pay for all that?
Well,
that's just.
Yeah,
I mean,
but see,
ridiculous.
well, the point is, as I went through, it's not paying for it. It's not being paid for. It's cuts. It's actually killing people. And of course, people have seen their insurance premiums going through the ceiling, which is really weird.
But then one thing, what's going to happen that if that comes to effect,
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people going to take advantage of that too, which might,
Take
Right.
advantage of what? The right to be on a morphine drip?
well,
There's
well,
not, no, what I'm telling you is there's nothing to take advantage of. It is not a health care plan.
Right.
See, this is the big line from the so-called conservatives. So you have all these gimmies who just want health care. No one's going to get health care.
That's what I'm saying.
They're going to be killed, and we get to pay more for killing them. They already announced, the big thing about the health care plan that even people who had some questions said, well, at least I can support this, where they said insurance companies have to sell you if you have pre-existing conditions. They already canceled that. They said, oh, we've gone over our threshold, we can't afford it anymore. So now the big thing that he was saying, that people with pre-existing conditions could get health care, they've reached their quota on that, and that's over. I mean, it's such a fraud.
There was, Martha had shown me something, that here in the state of New Jersey, there's an assembly bill, of course, physician-assisted suicide.
Yes.
And it's an assembly, it's got a number on it, and I've got
Die
it in my
with
bag.
dignity or something like that, wasn't it?
Hmm?
Die with dignity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the death with dignity, yeah,
And they
And
just passed it in Vermont.
yeah.
They did pass it.
In
I know
Vermont.
some
Oregon
states
as
have,
well.
it, but they're
Hmm?
trying to get it all over.
Yes.
so this is, yeah, I imagine they're doing the same thing. They couldn't pass it overall, so they're going around to the different
Right.
states. But I see it in there, and I'm just wondering how in the world we can stop this right to our congressman and tell them absolutely not, no.
Well,
way.
this is a state bill, so you've got to go to your
State bill,
legislature.
right.
Yeah, you got to go to your legislators.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's totally I mean, and think about it. What are we doing? We have so-called medical marijuana, but the distribution centers are not giving people pills. You're supposed to go smoke it. So it's degenerate. They want to legalize drugs. Christie and Cory Booker agree we should legalize drugs. And then you can have death with dignity. So you can dope yourself up so you don't know that you're suffering, get on a morphine drip and dehydrate and be dead, and you'll be a very small expense to society.
Mhm.
I mean, it's really, it's
No,
so,
it's actually that if say you're in the hospital and you're sick anyway, and you don't want to live any longer, they have the right, if you ask them, to give you something to kill you.
yes,
And you don't have to ask the families, okay, or nothing.
right.
So this is what it's about. So I
Right.
mean, that's
No, and think of the
suicide.
fraud. How do they
You know?
sell the idea of death with dignity? Can anyone here think, do you know anybody who is 200 or 300 years old? In other words, is there anyone who has managed to not die?
Not in this generation.
Like, is there, we need a right to be able to die. Is there any one of us who is not going to die at some point? So the whole idea that I have a right to die, that is an insane concept.
We could use it on Wall Street.
Yeah, no, that we could use it on.
Dignity.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, no. It's exactly part of this thing, and that's why people say, oh, aren't you exaggerating? I mean, LaRouche is out. What is that mustache for? You should know. Who has Obama killed? Did Obama kill 6 million Jews? No, he wants to kill 6 billion people overall. Does that count?
Yeah, one way or another, that's
Yeah.
what he wants to do.
Yeah.
He's nuts.
Yeah. So otherwise, there's a bunch of stuff on the back table. As people know, I hope, on June 9th, which is only 2 weeks from tomorrow, our choir and the small orchestra of our members from around the East Coast are going to be doing the Bach Magnificat and then a bunch of spirituals and lieder. It's going to be a fantastic concert. And it's Sunday afternoon, June 9th, and we will be working out. We'll probably have a carpool from here, or whatever. We'll figure it out to get people there. But you can take posters to put up. You can take tickets to give to people. We want to get them out, and then also, my campaign needs money. So if people can contribute, you're allowed by law to give $3,800 in a year. So no one can give more than that. But I know, I knew that would be disappointing to some people. But anyways, it would be a big help because we can print a lot more and do a lot more
It's gonna
if
be
we have the resources. But that's the next, the concert. And I think the concert can have a really powerful impact on the state because you look at this stupid, take Snooki or anything else, a lot of Italian American New Jersey residents are furious about the image of the mafia in the state. Our state has we have an image of being stupid. And the worst thing is not that we have an image of being stupid. The worst thing is that people like it. They think it's good to look like a dumb lout. that's really bad. That's the sign of a dark age. And then you look at what's come from the state. You had Einstein, Edison, George Washington's battles, you know, what came out of Princeton, what we did in the American Revolution, the manufacturing we did during World War II. I met with a plasma physics professor at Seton Hall who told me that the whole reason he wanted to stay in New Jersey was because when he graduated from university, anything you ever needed in the world to conduct experiments in physics was manufactured in New Jersey. So it was just the greatest place to be. So think about that image of our state and what people think that they're proud of now. And no wonder they keep electing idiots. So the concert is cultural warfare to remind people what it means to be a human being and not an animal. So we should really build it and we should get people to it.